They were the kids who let themselves into empty houses after school. They reheated their own dinners, turned on the TV, and learned how not to bother anyone. When they felt sad, they didn't call it pain. When they were afraid, they didn't run to find an adult. They just learned to stay quiet, stay strong, and keep going. Years later, those kids became the most reliable people in the room. They raise children, care for aging parents, hold down jobs, pay the bills, and always say they're fine. But beneath that independence lies a question very few have ever asked them. What happens when an entire generation is taught to survive on its own? This is the psychology of Gen X, a generation that didn't disappear because they were weak, but because they learned how not to be seen. Gen X is generally defined as those born between the mid-1960s and the early 1980s. They grew up after the idealism of the baby boomers, but before the digital world of millennials. Their childhood lived between landlines, cassette tapes, cable TV, shopping malls, and long afternoons spent alone. They witnessed families change, jobs change, technology change, and even trust in the system begin to shift. Gen X became the bridge between the analog and digital worlds. But they are also the generation most often overlooked in the very story they quietly carried. Gen X wasn't born distant, independent, or emotionally closed off. They became that way because childhood taught them too early that no one is always there. After school, many kids came home with a key in their hand and silence waiting inside. No one asked if they were okay. No one was consistently there to explain sadness, fear, or the feeling of being left behind. So they learned to cook for themselves, do their homework alone, entertain themselves, and soothe their own emotions. Independence started as a skill, but over time, it became a wall. Gen X learned that needing less was safer. And as adults, they often don't realize that "I've got it handled" can sometimes be a very quiet cry for help. Being forgotten isn't always something obvious. Sometimes, it's simply that no one truly thinks of you when talking about the future. Gen X grew up in the shadow of the baby boomers and the rising voice of millennials. Then Gen Z stepped into the cultural spotlight with its own language, technology, and attention. And Gen X remained in the middle, too old to feel current, but not old enough to be seen as needing care. They're not used to asking for attention. They also don't like turning their pain into a performance. So they stay quiet, keep working, take care of their families, and carry on. But that silence comes at a cost. When a generation goes unseen for too long, they begin to believe their emotions don't matter either. For Gen X, sarcasm isn't just personality. It's often a way to keep distance from what might hurt them. When you grow up in a world that changes too fast, you learn not to trust things too easily. Promises from family, companies, politics, or society can all fall apart. So Gen X developed a kind of armor, dry humor, skeptical eyes, and a familiar phrase, whatever. But whatever doesn't always mean they don't care. Sometimes it means they cared too much, and were disappointed too many times. Detachment helps them not fall apart. Sarcasm helps them speak about pain without admitting they're hurting. And behind that armor is often someone just trying not to break. As they enter midlife, Gen X isn't just dealing with themselves. They become the support system for almost everyone around them. On one side are aging parents who need care, doctor visits, financial and emotional support. On the other side are children who still need tuition, guidance, protection, and a stable future. And in the middle is Gen X, still working, maintaining income, paying off debt, holding relationships together, and trying to stay composed. They are the generation that takes care of everyone, but is rarely asked who takes care of them. Their exhaustion isn't loud. It lives in sleepless nights, late email replies, unpaid bills, and constant family calls. The generation that learned not to need anyone has now become the one everyone needs. At some point, Gen X begins to realize that survival is no longer enough. After years of working, raising kids, paying off debt, and holding everything together, they start to question where they're actually going. This isn't just a midlife crisis. It's a quiet confrontation with choices, sacrifices, and dreams that were put on hold. They look at their careers and wonder if they're still growing, or just enduring. They look at their families and wonder if the role of provider still leaves room for who they really are. They look in the mirror and see someone who has been strong for so long, but may no longer recognize themselves. The biggest question is not "have I succeeded?" It's after all these years of living for responsibility. Do I even know what I truly want anymore? But the story of Gen X isn't just about exhaustion, silence, or being overlooked. Beneath all that armor is a strength that's hard to see. They learned how to adapt before adaptability became something people praised. They lived through the analog world, stepped into the digital age, and kept working as if constant change was normal. Gen X knows how to live without a clear map. They are practical, resilient, grounded, and often calm in a crisis. They don't need big slogans to prove their worth. Their value lies in the fact that they're still standing after the ground has shifted beneath them so many times. And perhaps their greatest strength is this: maturity isn't about becoming harder, it's about learning how to soften without falling apart. Gen X doesn't need to be turned into victims. They've saved themselves too many times to need a story of pity. What they need more is to be seen, honestly. Seen in the exhaustion they try to hide. Recognized for the years they quietly carried others. And given permission to admit that being strong for too long can be exhausting. Maybe the next chapter for Gen X isn't about proving how much they can endure. It's about learning to put things down, to be supported, and to live for more than just responsibility. Because Gen X was taught to survive, but now, they deserve peace.